Hi, everybody. I'm here with Brenan today for the podcast, and we're going to talk about a discussion that we had on Facebook. And go ahead and roll that intro. Okay, welcome, Brennan. Nice to have you on the show.
Hello, nice to be here.
Awesome. So, one thing that I've got some critiques from some of my closer friends and some of the other people that have listened to the podcast, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of disagreement. And I really, in many regards of stuff that we have text, I guess forum style chatted about or agreed with or whatever in the past. I've enjoyed those conversations, and I thought it was a really good opportunity to, either one of us or both, maybe kind of have a experience of maybe disagreeing about something. So,
Absolutely.
the thing that we were talking about specifically to kind of get the audience up to speed here, and I'm not going to go into every single tiny detail in this synopsis because I'm sure we can talk about some of those details, but essentially...
Some of it's going to come up again.
Sure. So, essentially, the original thing that was talked about, it was a kind of a screenshot of, I think, a Twitter comment or I guess post that was saying something to the effect that like capitalism has gotten so bad that people vilified this lady. I think her name was Mrs. Liebeck, and she was the woman who was involved in the McDonald's hot coffee case, where she spilled hot coffee on herself and then sustained some third-degree burns for that. So I replied my initial thing, and then this is where we can just continue on from this point. So I made the initial comment of, I personally don't agree with either side because of essentially the system. Like it allows sophistry from the get-go. So we're already and granted this is why I kept trying to iterate that the text form is just not great for kind of like giving these fine details or whatever. But essentially, if you allow sophistry in the system, then you're risking, first of all, actual true justice in these cases on either party. And also, if there's a better system that we could be using for the money, then it makes sense that we would want to go with that system over the current one that we have.
I would agree with parts of that, but first we'd need to define what is sophistry for the purpose of this.
Sure. So, it is essentially using. I would consider lawyers to be the philosophers of the law. Like they go over and they look at the law and they use their knowledge of the law or their philosophy, which is kind of a broad term, so I'll narrow it down here. So the sophists, who are lawyers in this case, so we're talking about civil courts, the sophists would be those that are unscrupulous and essentially use the weaknesses of the wordings of the law. So for example, this isn't civil case, but a perfect example of a sophist is like Mitch McConnell. That's a sophist. He uses the weakness of the wordings of laws, or allows, where there's cases where somebody can then say, well, there's room for interpretation here, and then they expand it to its widest interpretation. That's who I would say would be a sophist.
Okay, so and in D&D terms, that would be lawful evil, essentially.
Yes, I would say.
One who takes the laws and bends them for selfish purposes or gain.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So that's a good working definition, and I can well work within that. And I would still disagree that there was sophistry on the side of Mrs. Liebeck's legal team. I would actually agree that McDonald's heavily used sophistry in probably most of its legal cases, but this one in particular.
Okay. And I, just for the sake of the audience, I think I know where you're going to go with this, but just for the sake of the audience, I want to kind of maybe elaborate a little bit. So are you saying that because we've already gone down this path and it doesn't make sense to like keep saying the same thing over again?
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that because they served a beverage in which was, not deemed to be safe for consumption, that makes them essentially kind of negligent in this?
Not just not deemed safe for consumption, but outside of reasonable expectations of their customer.
Okay. So go ahead, sorry.
One of the big things about negligence, and one of the things that you have to show that someone is negligent, is you have to show that what they provided was outside of reasonable expectations of your average person. So what your average person would expect to receive or expect in injury.
Sure.
If I stick my hand into an industrial kitchen mixer and it shatters my hand, I can reasonably expect that would be the case, so that is non-negligent. No one was negligent in that. But if someone, I don't know, actually a fairly good example would be someone getting burned by something that didn't appear to be hot. Okay. If someone, say, came by with a torch and heated up a metal plate because they intended on working on it in a few minutes and didn't put any signage around it, and someone else came up and touched the metal plate, that would be negligent, because there was a safety risk that did not meet the reasonable expectations. And those reasonable expectations change. If you were in like an iron forge and you saw just a piece of metal sitting around, well, the rule in iron forges is you treat everything as if it's hot.
Yes.
Unless you know for certain otherwise.
Okay. And that's where I want to kind of focus in on. And this is where I think that this is really like what we're engaging in here is ultimately like the court of opinion, right? Because like, so for example, you say beyond or outside of reasonable expectations. Mm-hmm. I would say that the coffee, the temperature that it was is within reasonable expectations for coffee to be served. And I mean, I get that you're disagreeing with that, but like, where do we ultimately come to a middle ground there, or do we? Is it just my opinion against yours, and that's it?
Who decides what's reasonable is the first thing, and courts have a mechanism for doing that.
Sure.
And in this case, one of the mechanisms they used was the overwhelming number of people that did not expect. McDonald's had over 10,000 complaints and over 700 cases filed against them.
Right.
In regards to this specific thing, which is showing that there is a significant number of people who did not expect this and were harmed by it.
So that's yet another term that you can not use specifically, but a person could twist for sophistry. So right, with sophistry they could say the impact is large because it's 700 people that have come forth and said this, but is this really that? I mean, they sell billions of cups of coffee in a given day.
Oh, absolutely.
700 people is like not even close to a drop of a bucket. That'd be like a microscopic drop you couldn't even see.
It wasn't just 700 people. It was 700 people who were so damaged by it that they decided to take legal action.
Right, and
Then it was a significant body of complaints outside of that. And there were also surveys done. And most surveys show that people don't expect to receive a cup of coffee that hot. And as I've referenced in previous conversations, if you were to spill a cup of coffee on yourself, you would expect a burn. That is reasonable. But the difference between a first-degree burn, the burn that most people would expect from a cup of coffee, it hurts, it stings, maybe it goes to second degree and you get a blister. You know, it can get pretty bad, but a third-degree burn is a significant level more.
And that's where I have to push back and disagree on that respectfully. So the temperature of the coffee was speculated to be somewhere on, that spilled on Mrs. Liebeck, and I have to put this stipulation in there. Otherwise, people are just going to come out and just be like, "Wow, this guy's just a complete and utter asshole that just wants Mrs. Liebeck to suffer, for the rest of her waking life with third-degree burns." That's not the case. I want her to get her help, and I want our society to take care of that, and I want her to get adequate representation, which, in fact, she didn't. She actually, if you look in, and I'll admit, when we first talked on the conversation, I didn't look at the specifics of the case, and since looking at the specifics of the case, man, she actually got kind of fucked over. Even still, after the whole thing went through, she got screwed over.
Absolutely, she did. Like, she is the loser in this case, most definitely.
For sure.
Her name has been smeared by McDonald's. She got almost no money at the end of the day. Like, there is a significant amount wrong with what happened with that case.
But here's to get back to my point here. The thing that I'll push back is like the study that was, or the survey that they took of the surrounding coffee places said that the coffee was served at approximately 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than what the McDonald's coffee case was specifying, or I don't even know if they knew for sure exactly how hot it was, but they're guessing by the burns that it was roughly 175 to 185. That being said, if you look at water temperature charts for scalding and severe burns, 155 degrees Fahrenheit takes 1 second for you to get a third-degree burn. 140 degrees Fahrenheit takes 5 seconds to get a third-degree burn. And I mean, even 133 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 seconds, 127, it goes on. But here's the thing. She had her pants on, which she was wearing sweatpants, for 90 seconds. And which you would hope that the heat dissipates quickly. I don't know about, like, in some cotton sweatpants, if that's going to be like your maximal effect or whatever, but point being is there was no scenario here, period, that she was going to receive a cup of coffee that's within the drinking. So, like, most people drink their coffee at about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So that being said, or less, of course, but that being said, even at 140 degrees Fahrenheit, she would have got third-degree burns.
So, you're a smart guy. I'm sure you understand thermodynamics. Sure. I work in a kitchen. I'm very familiar with hot liquids. Very, very familiar with them. I'm very familiar with the type of damage they cause and in how their heat dissipates. The difference between a liquid that was just boiling or near boiling or in the poaching range, which is technically what that coffee was in, and the difference between it even 10 or 20 degrees cooler on temperature loss after leaving a vessel and being spilled is significant. Because if you have 150 degree coffee and I were to pour it on my leg right now, and I'm wearing cotton pants right now, and it were to soak in and be against my skin, it would cool significantly more quickly, and I probably would not receive a third-degree burn. I'd probably receive a second degree. Even though the 1 second is there, by the time it is soaked into the material and spread across my skin, it'll probably be closer to like 120 degrees, and I'll probably be able to shuck my pants in a reasonable enough period of time.
I mean, what you just
If
said
that
contradicts this chart, though. I'm just saying, like, this is from the
how
American Burn Association.
Yeah, but how does it contradict that chart? I was talking about how things cool down as they impact fabric and other things. When you pour liquid out of a container, it begins to lose heat as it passes through the air. When it impacts fabric, it begins to lose heat as it passes through the fabric. All of that is chances for evaporation and heat loss. If you are starting at 190 degrees, the amount of heat loss is not going to be as significant for preventing a burn as if you're starting at 150.
Okay, but the whole point is like, whether it's 190 and you get your third degree burn in a fraction of a second, and then it dissipates, or you get your third degree burn in a second and it dissipates. In her case, she was like a worst case scenario. She was elderly. She was, like I said, wearing sweatpants, and then kept the sweatpants on for 90 seconds. And then
I'm sure she was trying to remove them.
She wasn't, actually, because there's actually a medical reason for that. That was another worst case scenario of, like, elderly people have typically less immediate feeling of pain due to their advanced age, and they also take actually more damage to their skin, unfortunately. That's all reasonable. Sure, and I'm just saying, once again, this isn't a case where, like, if there was I couldn't find actually the ordinance that was mentioned. There was some sort of an ordinance as to how hot coffee or beverages, but point being is, if that ordinance was there and McDonald's, they did wrong, then this is where I was really trying to get into the crux of the conversation. I don't think that we're going to agree on because I'm just saying, like, coffee's brewed at 195 to 205.
It shouldn't be. You're going to burn your beans.
I'm sorry, but I disagree with that. This right here from literally the National Coffee Association says that coffee should be, according to the skull, says, here we go. Your brewer should maintain a water temperature between 195 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit for optimal extraction. Colder water will result in flat, under-extracted coffee, while water that is too hot will also cause a loss of quality in the taste of the coffee.
Okay, I'm willing to accept that 195 to 205 is the brewing temperature.
And I will even grant you, it's like, hey, if there's a standard that states you shouldn't be serving coffee unless it's X Fahrenheit, whatever the heck it is, then I want McDonald's to pay the piper. What I want is, and this is why I think the whole case was all wrong. McDonald's lied. I think that the lady, she really wasn't actually being that greedy, but once the lawyers got involved, they became greedy because it was a multi-billion-dollar there's a shitstorm in this trial. I'm just saying, I really would prefer that we have a society in which she doesn't have to sue really anybody herself. As an individual, doesn't have to sue anybody. She just gets her medical taken care of, and she has disability or whatever she needs during that time that is paid by the people. And then that government body then, without her at all, the government then says, hey, the people, we paid for this lady's shit, and you're negligent. Not only are you going to pay a fine, but the government is going to make sure that you pay us back too. And I mean, in this case, it was like nobody really won in this case because it was just a bunch of bullshit. I mean,
McDonald's won. Let's be honest here. McDonald's won.
Well, I guess so.
That is the end of that thing, because McDonald's ended up getting most of the the money that she was supposed to get overturned. McDonald's ended up settling for some undisclosed amount, which was probably significantly less than that. She may or may not have gotten enough money to pay for her medical bills. We don't actually know.
Yeah.
And then they put millions of dollars into a smear campaign that to this day affects people being willing to or not willing to hold others accountable for liability actions because they feel they may be the ridiculous hot coffee person.
Well, and this
McDonald's won that.
This McDonald's may have in a way won, but I think that society kind of lost because essentially, I guess first of all, if there was like the case where, her bills were taken care of and it's like an actual arbiter of the law that is arguing the case, it's going to be just like a far different outcome. And on top of that, I mean, there's been case after case, almost every single year there's a, maybe there was like a few times in the, 2012 or 13 or something where it didn't happen, but every single year just about since this McDonald's hot coffee case in 1992, there's been like another case from a different company. It's like, it wasn't just McDonald's, like Burger King, Starbucks, just about any place that serves coffee. And I'm just saying that what's the trade-off here? Like there's a larger effect here that is not being seen. And it this whole entire same effect plays into many different avenues. It's not just like civil cases. I mean, this is just a very broad issue that our society, in my opinion, is bad about. Because like you said, there was a backlash. That backlash could have been avoided with a different system, but we don't have that.
Oh, and so my argument was not that our system is perfect or even good. My argument was that it is wrong of people to view Mrs. Liebeck as essentially having engaged in an unfair case or suit.
I don't think
that Mrs. Liebeck
specifically did. I think that once she got wrapped up in the lawyers did. And that's why they had a settlement. And it was decided by a jury. So, I mean, hey, she got supposedly the initial settlement was like $2.8 million or something like that. And then
80% was taken by the judge.
Right.
Yeah.
Which that's a problem.
So,
holy crap. I mean,
yeah, that is its own whole other problem. I actually agree with you about the fact that we should have a different system to deal with this stuff, that we should have just dealt with Mrs. Liebeck's injuries and then looked over everything after the fact and decided if McDonald's needed to pay for that. I think that would be a much better system. But within the system that we have, what we are dealing with right now, and we do have to look at right now because you can't wait 50 years for the system to change for Mrs. Liebeck to get her burn injuries looked at.
Right.
She needed to do something. She had to do something to deal with that. And she picked the only route that was really open to her. And based on the evidence that they had and the jury, they found that there was enough evidence to deal with that. And the further thing about this is that at any point McDonald's could have settled, could have said, yes, we'll pay your medical bills.
Yeah.
And it would have never gone to any lawyer. It would have just been McDonald's going, we acknowledged that a product we were selling you was unexpected in the way it damaged you and damaged you greater than you would have liked. And you need medical bills paid for. It would have been a drop in the bucket for them. And they could have even capitalized on goodwill advertising. But the thing about it is McDonald's didn't want to change the way it dealt with its coffee. because it made money off of that. The specific way it dealt with its coffee. There's actually like a whole study that McDonald's did internally about why they kept coffee at those temperatures.
Yeah, it was in
and
their
how
user
much
manual.
money it brought in extra. Yeah. It was in their franchisee owner manual, and it had a whole reason why they did that, and it was it maintained the coffee fresher for longer. So if you brew like 1 5-gallon batch of coffee or whatever the industrial size that McDonald's uses, it'll stay fresh for a significantly greater period of time. It creates a larger smell and larger smell radius, so people that weren't necessarily interested will smell the coffee and become interested. There was a bunch of stuff to it. But McDonald's decided that that was more valuable than this woman's medical care. And then put the woman into a position where her option was to find lawyers that could make a decent case for her within this system, or to just deal with having third-degree burn, essentially.
So, an injustice. An injustice happened.
Exactly. An injustice happened, and there had to be a way to rectify it. And in our current system, unfortunately, the only way to rectify it was to take a suit to McDonald's.
And here's the thing that I think is the biggest kind of crux that I don't think that I can get past, and why I think that, yeah, it would have been a crappy situation for her to not have her bills taken care of, and then she suffers for this. That's not a just system, right? Like, I'm not saying that I like that system, but at the same time, she was given a container in which that cup or the cup or the container had a lid on it that prevents from spilling, and she went over and removed that lid, therefore making it an unstable container. And I'm just saying,
to
like,
add the condiments that McDonald's gave her to add to her hot coffee in the car.
Okay, and once again, most people, when they get their coffee, they wait until it cools down to be messing around with it. Unless they're sitting it literally on a table. She didn't have cup holders.
I would not say that was the case.
I
would not say that was the case. I grew up with a parent who drove around with a cup of boiling hot coffee in one hand while they were driving. So they would have the coffee in one hand while they were driving and be drinking it piping hot everywhere they went with no lid on it. And that's an anecdotal thing, but I think if you look at it, most people, when they're given like sugar and creamer packets, if they're a passenger in the car, they'll apply the sugar and creamer packets while they're in the car, even while it's moving, and she was at a stop. Yeah. Most people I know don't wait until they get to a table. The whole point of going through a drive-through is so that you can get your stuff now.
And I'm just saying that they were actually, the vehicle was parked. So
yeah, the vehicle,
like
they did park the vehicle
or something. Like, they were parked.
Correct.
And then she put the coffee in between her knees, a styrofoam cup.
Yes.
Flexes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then quite literally having it could be, it doesn't matter what cup. Like, I guess you could probably design a cup that had the most minimal amount of flex when removing the lid. Like, I don't know what that would be, but maybe that's the case, for the future, which I don't think they really even accomplished that, because it's the same cup design. Maybe they're using paper now instead of styrofoam. I don't know.
Paper is a little bit stiffer. It's like paper lined styrofoam now, almost, at McDonald's. The last time I saw it.
But that's the ultimate crux there for me, is just, hey, I guess if the regulation's there, I can't really argue that. You got to follow the law, and if you start arguing, hey, well, no, they don't have to follow the law, then it's like, well, you obviously don't give a shit
why
about
do
society.
We even have the law?
Right, exactly. So I'm not saying that, hey, people shouldn't follow the law, but at the same time, it's like, man, if coffee is literally brewed at this temperature, none of the sources that I could really find were something that I even wanted to screw around with, because it was really just kind of like a coffee shop's, random statement about what temperature coffee should be. And there was really no like group of people who are like coffee aficionados that stated that coffee should be at some certain temperature or whatever, or what it's commonly served at. But a lot of the shit that I was finding is about 185 degrees Fahrenheit, and people typically will put like a colder, liquid in it, which cools it down, or if they drink it black, like I drink black coffee, I'll sip on it, I guess, with the lid on there. But that wasn't her case, right? Because she was adding condiments. So I don't know. I just can't get past that, where it's like, hey, you took the lid off. I mean, that's like the same scenario that you said in our conversation was, if somebody gives you a container of acid, and the container's unsafe, then hey, you got an issue there. I don't really think that this, and hey, this is a 92, so I'd have to look at the specific styrofoam cup. But styrofoam cups, in my experience, are only
terrible.
Only sturdy if you take the lid, or only not sturdy or floppy if you take the lid off. And it's not a great idea to put that between your knees while doing that. I mean, shoot, just step out of the car and do it on the roof of the car or something. Like,
I don't think that's that. So she actually admits that in the case. That's one of the things she specifically said.
Yeah.
That those were the part that she was at fault for. And in the case, they did find that McDonald's only held partial fault because of those details.
Sure.
So they did address that. It's not like they went, oh, this is no fault of yours. She was like, yeah, no, I did open the cup. I did have it between my knees. That may have been a little bit silly, but also this is above an ordinance level of hot, and people don't really tend... So, again, I work in food service. That's what I do. I run a catering company. I make coffee all the time for people in huge batches. I brew it, but it's almost never served at the brewing temperature.
Sure.
It's always served lower than the brewing temperature.
I guess all of the burners that I've worked with, because it's been a few years since I've worked in food service. I did it for probably about 4 or 5 years in high school. And I'm just trying to remember all of the bun, coffee makers that we had. I don't think that there was like a temperature setting on the burner. It's just on or off. And I would be curious to see, like, if you just have it on the burner and it's been sitting there for, even maybe just test it, because you can't do it with a home coffee pot.
I have tested my coffee pot. Mine holds at 155.
Okay. At your work, is that what you're saying? Or at home?
Yeah.
Okay.
At work. I don't check the one at home. I don't need to tempt that one.
Sure. Okay. So, and that's why I'm just saying, like, hey, there might be a case where, sure, the dissipation, because it's a time, it's a factor of time, when it comes to heat. So it's going to dissipate, probably faster to the dangerous range, which this scalding, scald injury education thing says about 120 is like the maximum range of temperature for bathing, essentially. And that's even probably too hot, because it says that 5 minutes you can get third-degree burns if that water is kept at that temperature for the full 5 minutes, I'm imagining. But point is, it's just like, she was getting third-degree burns no matter what. I don't
there's
see how
actually a significant issue with elderly people getting significant burning from getting into showers or bathtubs that are too hot for them. That is a thing. But, again, though, there's also the extent of the third degree burns, because a third degree burn could be very small. So say she had like, you know, a small one on the top of her thigh or her knees or something like that.
Yeah.
Because of the temperature of the coffee. The temperature of the coffee is going to have a huge difference in the extent of the burning. You know, if it's 190 degrees, you spill it on yourself, you could have third degree burns all the way up your thighs, your legs, all of the area that the coffee touches could get third degree burns. If it's 155, 140, something like that, you could have much smaller, much patchier third degree burns. Essentially, less damage was dealt to you. And part of my thought on this is the extent of damage and the difference in the extent of damage, because just one small third degree burn is different from a mass area of third degree burns, and that's something that burn institutes talk about all the time.
Right, but in her case,
You know,
she kept her pants on for 90 seconds. Like most people don't do that.
and most people don't do that. She is elderly. She was in the car. There are circumstances for that.
Yeah,
but the heat is also going to continue dissipating. So if you're at 140 and you lose 5 degrees pouring it out on yourself, and then the temperature continues to drop rapidly after that because it's being exposed to your clothes, your skin, all of that is absorbing heat. You're going to absorb significantly less heat from that than you would coffee of a higher temperature. Even if she's going to get a third degree burn, the extent of it is still going to be less. It will be less widespread. It will be less damage overall.
Well, I mean, I just go ahead. Sorry.
As hot fluid spreads through fabric, it evaporates and cools very quickly. So you're going to see a much greater drop in temperature from that. And that could be the difference between needing reconstructive surgery and needing some really good creams and recovery for a few months.
Sure. Well, like I said, I can see your point. I just disagree, I guess, with the total liability there. I mean, at the same end, though, I really feel like there's got to be like a better system that's not adversarial like ours is, that causes this problem in the first place.
Absolutely agree about there being a better system.
Well, we probably wouldn't even have this conversation if there was a better system, because there would be no.
You're absolutely correct.
No trial or anything like that to even weigh in on, because she would have just got her stuff taken care of. But
yep, it would have been easy. She would have gotten her stuff taken care of. She would have gone about with her life. The arbitrator or judge or magistrate or whoever it is that dealt with McDonald's would have an investigation, look at it, and go, yeah, you don't need to pay for this, or, oh, you need to pay for 80% of this, or 20% of this, or whatever they decided was fair, and it would have moved on. But unfortunately, in our adversarial system, there has to be, in our court system, there has to be a winner and a loser. Unfortunately. Right. If the case does not go through, then the defendant wins. Regardless of if there are reasons why we think they lost, if the case doesn't pass the judge, they won.
Sure.
And even in some instances where the judge passes the case, where it goes through, where the jury awards damages, they still can end up winning, especially on appeal, like McDonald's did.
Sure, and that's where it's wrong, is, like, Yeah, I mean, there's no way around that in this system. It
Yeah,
actually
it's
pains me to even have like this the say of, okay, well, in our system somebody's got to pay the friggin' bills, because we can't just
yep.
have Mrs. Liebeck not uh you know be essentially suffer in a society is like
Yeah,
just
and
completely
it would be
immoral and
cruel to
wrong.
do to anyone. It
Right.
would be cruel to do to anyone if you saw someone suffering from a medical injury and we had the ability to help them and we didn't. It's cruel. Like, that's kind of how it boils down, at least in my mind.
Sure, and I think that's like
And
the main thing that I would hope that, people, whether you agree, disagree with me, kind of more talking to the audience here, or you agree,
hmm
disagree with Brennan, the ultimate like thing that I'm wanting to point out in all of this is like it's quite obvious, and we're not trying to just repeat this over and over again, that our system needs some sort of reform. I mean, not maybe
hmm
like just completely trashing the entire thing and then starting from the ground up. Maybe that's the case, I don't know. But ultimately, like, that's the thing that pains me about every one of these cases. It's not just the McD coffee case, or, any of the other, various, famous cases out there, that some people roll their eyes
hmm
and then other people say, oh, okay, well, that was justified. The point is,
hmm
these shouldn't even be happening. Like, we should have a society, like, when we pay our taxes, that should be paying for, our, what I think should be a right to, I guess, prosperity. Now,
yeah,
I don't think that our money necessarily pays for that. I think that it pays for the prosperity of other people who are typically already rich. But that being said,
yeah.
it's just maybe just shift the conversation a little bit. I think we've said just about all we can say about the coffee case, and I do appreciate that conversation. It was
Oh
fun.
yeah,
But just to shift things
absolutely.
a little bit, what do you think like is a way that we could maybe, I mean, I know the obvious is vote for better people, stupid people, like, come on. Don't be stupid, vote
Yeah.
for better people. But, beyond that, like, what in your opinion can we do to try to, get past these problems of like the backlash problem, which we're seeing with the Republicans specifically right now. How do we get past these societal problems and try to trudge forward and hopefully upward rather than downward?
So something I've actually been considering, because vote for better people is not and has not been an effective clarion call for many, many years.
Okay.
And I think our kind of escape route is economic, because economics at this point is what controls our nation's political system. If you don't have money, you essentially don't have a say.
Right.
There you have minimal say in minimal things. Um, and there is another route that is political, but that's a little bit different. So the economic route, what I think is that what we need to do is start building out local employee-owned infrastructure. Instead of going to, I don't know if you have Safeway, you probably have Kroger out there, would probably be the big store, the
No,
big box.
it's Hy-Vee.
Hy-Vee. Okay, I'm not familiar with Hy-Vee. Um, but instead of going there, having employees start a grocery store that they run and manage, one, is better for our productivity overall.
Sure.
There's a significant amount of evidence that employee run cooperatives are more productive and more efficient with happier employees than just about any other business format.
I I
And
could
then
agree with that.
continuing, yeah, it's one of those things where like a lot of people hear it and reject it, and then they think about it and they go, oh, I know that makes perfect sense now that I thought about it for more than like 10 minutes.
Sure.
Um, But people are kind of trained to reject that kind of idea. They're trained to think that we need to have someone above us to manage us, otherwise nothing will work. And it's like, well, I mean, your manager is also an employee, so you can still have one of those. It's not, you don't have to throw away everything, but
Yeah.
you just don't have some guy siphoning off money. And in that way, by having localities and local people kind of gather together and essentially take back economic control from corporate entities, you can then shift the political system through that and via that money. The
Sure.
other option is local politics. And there is a system local to me. It's not used a ton, and it is mostly used in criminal cases, but also sometimes in civil cases. They have a group in Oakland that does it, and it's called Restorative Justice. And there is a movement behind things like restorative justice. There's a large body of lawyers and legal professionals and judges that want to move to a better system.
Sure.
And the idea behind restorative justice is, instead of just deciding what a liability is, you would essentially get the parties into a room with an arbitrator or a mediator, and you would have them, and a counselor, like an actual psychologist, and you would have them work through everything and come to some type of deal on what would be considered an appropriate way of dealing with what happened.
Sure.
And that allows for reforms in multiple areas. In criminal justice, it allows for victims to confront the person that harmed them and have an actual conversation with the person that damaged them, which is something that surprisingly a lot of victims of crime are very interested in. They kind of want to know why.
Sure.
Why did this happen? Why did you do this? Why me? And so it provides closure in that regard. So on the local level, encouraging cities, counties, and places like that to adopt some sort of secondary judicial system that allows for a more even kind of method of going about and deciding how things should happen, as well as not dealing with an at-fault idea, because one of the ideas behind restorative justice is that it is not at fault. When you go in there, you are not, it's not you are guilty, you are innocent. It is what happened, how did it happen, and how can we deal with this to make it equitable to both parties and provide closure and move things forward.
Sure, and that I like that a lot better than anything that I've ever read upon or personally experienced in the system we currently have.
Absolutely, and that's something that to make it work, you have to get it moving at the local level. It's never going to come from like a federal or state mandate. Because that isn't the way we do justice right now. And it's not going to be the way we do justice until it's proven to be functional. And it may never be the only way we do justice. There will be times where it is necessary to have a criminal trial or a civil trial if one party refuses to meet with the other party. If one party isn't interested in closure, they're like, hey, this person hurt my daughter, and I'm the only one left to stand for her, and I don't want to see this person. I don't want to talk to them. I just want justice to be done.
Sure.
But it gives an option. It gives people the ability to kind of take control of their own fate in a legal system instead of it being passed to lawyer, judge, and jury.
Sure. So talking about the kind of like moving things to more of a local scope. I don't know that he made any comments specifically on this in regards to like a justice system, but that reminds me of kind of like the economic opinions of Milton Friedman, because he was all about, like I remember seeing this old, it's like public broadcast that he did. It was like 40 some minutes long, where he was talking about how there was these kind of like government supported workers, is kind of like the unemployment line essentially. They'd have these workers come in and do various jobs, and they'd be contracted by either the city or the state or whatever, some government agency. And there were these people in this kind of broken down neighborhood, and there was a bunch of apartment buildings that were just not livable and were essentially falling down. And these people who didn't have jobs, they decided, well, I'm just going to go over into that building and start fixing it up. And then eventually the government, they made enough noise that, the government said, hey, we can provide support here. We're going to send these workers over from this, government agency, these people that don't have a job, to go over and do this work. And ultimately, when Milton asked them, he said, hey, to the guys that were going in there and not expecting a paycheck, he said, what would you prefer, that they send you workers and pay for those workers, or just give you materials? And they said, give us materials. We would rather you just give us the ability to make something out of this world, and not as in like out of this world as in the phrase, but just make something for ourselves through the sweat of our brow, essentially, rather than you paying people who don't ultimately really want to be here, to go over and do this work that they ultimately don't really want to do.
Absolutely. And that is, it comes into kind of a compound problem there, because in that situation, I would agree. Sending materials is better than sending workers. If the labor is already getting done and we want to support it, just send them more materials to help it get done faster.
Sure.
But unfortunately, and this goes back to liability, giving people materials and tools and things opens up liability, because a lot of people don't know how to construct a building.
Sure.
Or they don't know what parts of a building you can and can't knock down. I don't know if you've ever gone on YouTube and typed in, what was it called? Supporting wall. But you find a lot of videos of people taking a sledgehammer and knocking down the supporting wall of their house.
Wow.
And like, I don't know anything about construction, but I know you don't knock down the supporting wall. Yeah. I also wouldn't know what a supporting wall looked like if it wasn't told to me. And so you get into a kind of situation where if you give these guys, if they say, okay, we need, sledgehammers because we have to remove the old walling that's moldy, and we want, this tool and that tool, and then we want a bunch of wood and a bunch of this, and then they go and they collapse the apartment building on themselves. Well, whose fault is that? They didn't have the tools to collapse it on themselves before they did it, and you gave them the tools to collapse it on themselves. Technically, they collapsed on themselves, but you gave these tools to people who you didn't know if they had the knowledge or training to utilize them appropriately in a way that was safe for everyone. And knocking down that apartment building can affect the other buildings next to it and other people that have nothing to do with the people working on the building.
Sure. So, I mean, in modern day, the stipulation would have to be, hey, this is going to be, you can do the work if you want, but has to be like a project manager of some sort that
we'll send you a couple of job foremen and a couple of like licensed construction people, and they'll oversee the project, and you'll get the tools and materials. And at the same time, what's really good about that idea and kind of model, and it is something that we did have immediately after the Great Depression. It was one of the things that helped pull us out, was essentially jobs guarantee, where you could get training to do something like construction, plumbing, electrical work, things like that. By doing that work,
Sure.
apprenticeships or, various government programs, and then you would come out of that. Once you're done building this place or doing that thing, you now have a house, and you have skills that you can market for more jobs.
Sure.
And one of the things, and it's something that comes up a lot when you look at serious charities that work in Africa. If you look at serious charities, like charities that really want to do good in places like Africa, they're never going, oh, well, we want to donate water bottles, or we want to donate this. It's always, we want to teach these people skills. We want to find ways to, get a plumber out to this village to build this thing. It's not, we just want to have, our crew come in, build this thing, and boom, these people are helped. It's, we want to pay the local plumber to run this pipe so that there can be a water tap in the middle of the village. And the reason being is because when that plumber gets money to do that and is paid to do that and gets the materials to do that, it is infinitely more valuable, especially because they will often have, teenagers and young adults be hired on to help the plumber work, because, he's laying a whole pipeline from a river. He's not going to want to dig the ditch himself.
Sure.
And so you end up with a much more effective and efficient system to essentially give people some more control over their own destiny. This
Sure.
also doesn't cover like things like disabilities and stuff like that, which is a whole nother complex box of worms that, is out there.
So we're getting to the end of the hour here. Do you have any final thoughts or any final comments you'd like to make?
My final thought is kind of that regardless of how things boil out and whether we agree or disagree on the well, actually we kind of do agree on the outcome of the case.
Yeah.
That it was bad. Like, the outcome was bad, just not necessarily bad in the same way.
Sure.
It screwed over someone who needed help, and the system is what did it. The system was the problem. The way it was forced to be managed was the issue, and it was mostly the issue because it was put in the hands of people who cared more about money and monetary gain than they did about the actual injured person involved.
Sure. And that kind of reminds me too of I had a conversation with a very conservative gentleman, and of course, for the audience sake, in U.S. politics, conservative, and he kept arguing about how, like, these ballots that were, supposedly unlawful ballots, I think in Nevada or some conspiracy theory that's been, or lie that's been spread around. But point being is like, because I think it was Nevada has some law saying that you can't have mail-in ballots under some unless it's under some stipulation, and the Republican legislation went over and blocked deciding whether that stipulation was true or not for COVID. That essentially all of the ballots that were sent in are invalid, and therefore Donald Trump wins the election. And this is kind of where I'm getting at this. Sorry to, it seems like it might come out of left field here, but ultimately, this is where the problem lies in that reasoning. Is like, well, what's the overall goal here? The goal should be that the American people get a chance to vote. Like, all of these other, extraneous issues, whether, somebody was wrong to send those ballots, whether somebody was wrong to count those ballots, where they were wrong to accept those ballots, that's completely separate. But we're not going to do a disservice to the American people just because, somebody messed up administratively, essentially. And I think that's kind of it doesn't exactly, one for one compare to the McDonald's coffee case, but like that's kind of where I think that realm is like somebody needed to, like you said, it's a good point, look at the lady's medical issues and say, look, it doesn't matter how you got these medical issues, you need to be taken care of. And it just really, really sucks. And I'm currently too young and maybe a little bit too naive to run for office myself, but someday I want to try to change the system to be a just system in any way that I can. And I think it's like learning experiences of talking to individuals, like yourself and, other people, that have these, different ideas, and, we can engage in this discourse. Ultimately, I think that it's going to kind of broaden my ability to look at things and say, wait a minute, what's the overall outcome here? And am I just, pushing back on this because, like, initially it doesn't seem right, rather than looking to see what the overall picture of it is?
That makes sense. And there is a very common thread in society, and it's something that I think we as a group of people all over the world, this is something that you can see almost anywhere. People often think someone deserves an injury or problem because they made a mistake. In this case, they dumped coffee on themselves. There are a lot of people who would say because that happened, she essentially deserves that.
And I don't think that.
Exactly. And I think that is a poor way to go about it, because everyone makes mistakes. Everyone. And if we're going to say that if you make a mistake, you deserve what happens to you, you're essentially saying that society should just all be about luck. Did your mistake turn out incredibly bad, or was it okay?
Well,
there's no way to know.
Well, and that's why I, and I will admit I had poor delivery there in the text format on Facebook, but that's why I brought up Kant's philosophy, because like that's exactly what we're talking about right now. And he died like in the early 1800s, but point being is like his whole centerpiece of his philosophy is that, and this is his words here, I just had a few notes over here, but it is, I ought never to act except in such a way that I could also will that maxim should become a universal law. So ultimately, you want to make laws that not only look at the individual aspect, but also take into consideration if everybody felt free to do this particular thing. And I would say that like having this this thought process, just thinking of it from a moral standpoint of, well, they done something stupid, so they deserve, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, kind of, essentially. In this case, I don't think that really, like, is the moral stance to be taking. Like,
correct.
She didn't necessarily, like, deserve that. It's not like we can assume that this Mrs. Liebeck is like literally a like Goofy the caricature, but in human form, where they're just like clumsily. Yeah. And even that, in that case, it's like, wow, maybe they need to get, like if you think about Goofy and how Goofy acted, is like, holy cow, why is society not getting him help with his organizational skills? But
help with his organization skills. Like, why is no kinesiologist checking why he has such a weird, like, non-concept of his own physical boundaries? Why has he not been looked at?
Sure.
And I totally agree with that. And it's different if someone is acting in a malicious manner. That's a whole different story. If you act in a malicious manner and seek and you get consequences for that, I don't necessarily think they should ruin you, but there should be a negative consequence that people deal with from that point. Like there has to be some sort of negative to acting maliciously.
Sure.
But you shouldn't have that for just simple mistakes that everyone makes. That'd be like, if a kid ran and, scraped his knee or stubbed his toe from running around and tripping, like, you don't look at him and go, oh, well, you shouldn't have been running.
Yeah.
No, you take care of the injury, you deal with it, kids make mistakes, everyone understands that.
Sure.
But as soon as you kind of like take that into the adult range, people suddenly like miss that concept.
Right. But, well, Brenan, we've had some pretty good conversation here. I appreciate having you on, and
Absolutely.
I would be glad to have you on other capacities. We can probably talk offline on that, but
yeah, I'd be interested in that.
That'd be awesome. We have a couple people. One of my friends, his name's Jesse. I've had him on the podcast a couple times, and a few others that I'm thinking of an idea, since we can have a few people in Discord, is like bringing up a particular topic of some sort, whether it be political or philosophical, religious, or whatever the case may be, and having like an even number of people, and then seeing how people weigh out and converse. I think it would be
interesting.
Kind of cool to have like a long form conversation, kind of Joe Rogan style maybe. But that being said, thanks again for coming on, and I'm gonna switch to the audience here real quick. So if this is content that you like, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is The Smoogley, and same thing on Facebook. Please like my page, The Smoogley, and I guess we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.